Hey everyone, and welcome back to Rank and File Sports. And today we're going to be hopping right back into our series where we are predicting every single Power 4 team's record by the start of the college football season. And today it's the Virginia Tech Hokies. Now, Virginia Tech is being hyped up by a lot of people for this season. They have some high expectations, and we'll have to see if they are able to live up to them. The schedule is kind of favorable. They're able to avoid Florida State, NC State, North Carolina, Louisville, some of the better teams in the ACC this season. The non-conference schedule isn't too bad for Virginia Tech, starting out on the road at Vandy, who should be once again the worst team in the SEC. And the two games after that are also pretty easy, with Marshall and a road trip to Old Dominion. Now it gets a little bit tougher with Rutgers to close out the non-conference schedule. The Scarlet Knights are going to be a very tough team this year. They're going to run it down your throats, and just overall a very tough team to beat, especially because they're pretty comparable to Virginia Tech as far as overall talent goes. So this one should be really close, a really fun game to watch that week. The following week is a difficult road trip to Miami. This will be a Friday night game. Should be really high scoring, super fun to watch. It will be close, but Miami with the home field advantage, especially on a Friday night, they're going to be tough to beat. The road trip to Stanford shouldn't be too terrible. Virginia Tech is a better team than the Cardinal. But given that it's a super long road trip, um, it might be a little bit closer than some people expect. Out of the bye week, a pretty easy home game with Boston College. Eagles are not going to be a super talented team this season. They should be on the rise in the next few years. They hired Bill O'Brien as their head coach. But just overall, not really sure if they're going to be able to compete that well with Virginia Tech this season. Georgia Tech is a bit of a different story. They have Haynes King at quarterback for his second season with the team. And overall, this isn't a bad roster. Georgia Tech is going to be a team that might surprise some people in the ACC this season. This one being on the road for them will be kind of tough, but Virginia Tech is by no means guaranteed a win at home here. A road trip to Syracuse will also be difficult. With Kyle McCord transferring in, he was a pretty decent quarterback by Ohio State standards, but he's going to be a very, very good quarterback by Syracuse standards. So the Syracuse offense should take a step forward this season. And overall, the roster is pretty solid. They should be able to compete with this Virginia Tech team, especially at home. This one should be really close. Another fun one to watch. And finally, Clemson at home. The Tigers didn't bring in a single transfer, which made headlines this offseason. Dabo wants to do things his own way, but that should work out for him at least this season. Now, they might not be able to win a national championship anymore like this, but they are still a very talented team. They recruit well, and they're going to be a tough team for Virginia Tech to beat, even though Virginia Tech is at home. Following the second bye week, the schedule's not too bad. A road trip to Duke and a home game against Virginia. Both of these teams will be finishing in the bottom half of the ACC, so not too much to worry about here. The home and away games are split half and half with 6 apiece, and Virginia Tech only has 2 of their opponents ranked in the rank and file top 25, those being Miami and Clemson, giving Virginia Tech an overall schedule difficulty of 3.5 out of 10.
We only have one guaranteed win this year for Virginia Tech, and that is the Old Dominion Monarchs. You could probably imagine why Virginia Tech is going to be one of the better ACC schools this year, and ODU has we expect to really struggle this season. We have 6 likely wins for Virginia Tech this year. We have Vanderbilt, Marshall, Rutgers, Boston College, Georgia Tech, and Virginia. One thing Virginia Tech has over most of, if not all of these teams, is their caliber of players. Even though they've been down recently, Virginia Tech's a relatively strong program as far as program tradition is concerned. They're one of the better uh, teams in the SEC from that, sorry, ACC from that standpoint. Um, so we starting on with Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt is routinely one of, if not the worst SEC team. So we don't expect them to be able to compete with the Hokies for very long. And Marshall is a Sun Belt school. They've been one of the better group of five teams over the past 5 to 10 years, but we don't expect them to be able to hang with Virginia Tech for very long. But one thing that is important to note is that this team did beat Notre Dame in South Bend a couple seasons ago, so it's not impossible for the Thundering Herd to be able to win this one, in our view. However, we don't see it happening, more than 1 out of 10 games. As far as Rutgers goes, this Rutgers team is very tough to get a read on because they have an easy schedule. They could sneak their way into the playoffs if they get a few bounces to go their way, you know. But we think that just because it's an early season matchup, Virginia Tech has the better roster. We think that'll be enough for the Hokies to be able to win. And as far as Boston College and Georgia Tech go, Boston College especially has been one of the worst teams in the ACC recently. Georgia Tech has been as well, but they are on the rise in our view. They have accomplished a good amount of success these past couple seasons in Atlanta. Um, but with that said, we don't think the Hokies will have too much of an issue with either of those teams. And as far as Virginia goes, good news for Hokies fans. We don't expect the Cavaliers to be able to put up much of a fight against Virginia Tech. We think Virginia's going to be one of the worst teams in the ACC this year. This is a Virginia Tech team that is much better than they have been, so we don't think we're exactly comparing apples to apples when we look at Virginia and Virginia Tech. Therefore, we have the Hokies winning pretty easily. Moving on to the toss-ups, we have three of them. We have Stanford, Syracuse, and Duke. You may be surprised to see Stanford on this list, but part of the reason why is because Stanford always seems to hang around in games that they shouldn't. Um, we think that, an example of that is last season's game against Colorado, where they got down 29 to nothing and ended up winning in multiple overtimes by a score of 46 to 43. You may know the name Eric Eilmanner. He torched Travis Hunter for 290 receiving yards in that game, and he was a breakout star for the Cardinal in that one. Using that example, we think that the Cardinal, they always seem to be a team that you don't really want to mess with, right? Like, you don't want to have a game where it's close for too long, because if they hang around for long enough, they might, by the end of the game, they might beat you, which is a scary thought. So, Virginia Tech, probably on paper, pretty easy to pencil in the win, but we don't think it's that simple. As far as Syracuse goes, they had quarterback Kyle McCord from Ohio State. This is a Syracuse offense that will be much better than they were last year. And we think, therefore, they can pose a threat to Virginia Tech, but it will be a game that definitely is one of the more underrated ACC matchups of the year as far as, um, you know, game of the year potential. Obviously, we won't go that far in saying that it has a chance of being at, near the top of that list, but there's a, honorable mention category in our view, so they might be able to sneak in there with a close game against the Orange. And as far as Duke goes, they may be losing their quarterback and they may be losing their coach. So part of the reason why we have this as a toss-up is because of exactly that. We don't know exactly how to get a read on the Blue Devils in the preseason. We could think they may be a bowl team, they may not be a bowl team. And because of Virginia Tech's inconsistencies over the past couple seasons, that's why we don't have it as, a likely win or even a guaranteed win for the Hokies. And finally, we have two likely losses for Virginia Tech going into 2024, and those two losses are Miami and Clemson. Miami and Clemson are both very, very talented ACC teams. Virginia Tech has some talent in their own right, but not quite the talent level of the Canes or the Tigers. So they're inherently at a disadvantage right there. And then when you add in Mario Cristobal and Dabo Sweeney as the coaches they have to face, it's even more of a disadvantage in our eyes. Cristobal may be, um, you know, made fun of for the unfortunate incident in the eyes of Canes fans where all they had to do was take a knee. They didn't. They fumbled, and Georgia Tech scored. But I mean, he has been successful pretty much everywhere he's coached. We can't really say the same about Miami, but he did a good job at Oregon, and we think that he is a relatively established name. So we think that his, knowledge of the game and his recruiting ability, which has been impressive, we think that that gives them even more of an advantage and um, too much of an advantage for Virginia Tech to be able to overcome. As far as Clemson goes, Dabo Swinney's been criticized these past couple seasons for underperforming, but he is still one of the most well-known coaches in college football, and he's one of the most successful coaches with one of the best resumes in all of college football. So Clemson might have been down for a couple years. Maybe that'll continue this year. You can argue with his refusal to use the transfer portal, which in our eyes is misguided. We think he should definitely be using the transfer portal because there are some good players in there that could definitely help Clemson. And there are some good players in there that definitely would not turn down Clemson um, if they offered. So we do think he needs to change his philosophy on that a little bit, but all of that aside, he still is a great coach. Uh, Quarterback Cade Klubnik is expected to take a big leap forward this year in 2024, so we don't think Virginia Tech's going to be able to measure up to Clemson, uh, at least for this season. Maybe in the future that could be different, but we don't think so in 2024.
Taking a look at that schedule overview, we do have the Hokies starting out the season 4-0 in non-conference play, but unfortunately dropping that road game to Miami to start their ACC schedule. Now we do have them bouncing back in the road game against Stanford, and then also with a win against Boston College. But that 3 game stretch with Georgia Tech, a road trip to Syracuse, and Clemson at home are all going to be pretty tough games. We believe Virginia Tech will actually be favored in the first 2, but we like them to lose all 3. Following the second bye week, however, we do have Virginia Tech pulling off back-to-back wins over Duke and Virginia, moving their record to 8-4. Adding up all of the percentages, and we have a projected record of 7.85 and 4.15. So favoring maybe a 5th loss, but really close to that same 8-4 number. FPI likes Virginia Tech a lot lower at 6.6 and 5.4, and only a 4.3% chance to make the playoffs. Now, we see potential for this Virginia Tech team to have an even better season. They could potentially beat Georgia Tech and Syracuse. I think the record probably caps out at 10-2 if everything goes their way. Even if they pull off an upset, that probably means they drop another game somewhere where they shouldn't. As far as the floor, they could lose to Rutgers, maybe that Stanford game. Really, I still think that no matter what, we're going to see Virginia Tech in a bowl this season. So, thank you guys so much for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and we will see you in our next video.